Just don't step out on a big thing of ice. Okay, Jim, where are we today?
Today we ran out of road. We were following this road and we ended up here, and like usual,
Yeah?
end of the line in the cemetery.
This is it.
I think today we're going to do a little bit of a video on Old Whitehall, Coral City, and Pigeon Falls.
Okay.
All these young communities at their time when they started here in the early 1860s, they all had a population that was, let's say, exploding for Trempealeau County. Growing well, the farmers were happy. There was good fertile ground for grass, and they had plenty running water. If you ever watered cattle with a 5-gallon pail, you'll know how important it is to have water when you got cattle. So I said the early farmers came in here. I said they had a good crop. They could raise a lot of grain. But one of the things Trempealeau County lacked right this end was some place to get rid of that grain.
Right.
You had to haul it. And it
because
either was.
the river is too shallow. It's not going to work.
They thought of it. In 1861, the
Right.
farmers here thought, let's take and we'll make flatboats and we're going to haul some grain out of here and this is going to work for us. But after a while, they said, no, it's not feasible. This isn't going to work.
That is not. The Trempealeau isn't noted for being a river with good navigation.
So then they turned around and they still had to haul either to Fountain City, to Trempealeau, or to La Crosse. So it was a long thing.
Yeah.
But what started most of these little towns, like I said here, I said we got Coral City and we got Old Whitehall. I said the biggest thing that started them was a mill. If you had a mill, land that no one would want to buy became really valuable, because if there was a mill, that meant people. And if people came there, well, they came from a distance. They'd probably need a hotel. They may need a blacksmith, general merchandise, other services and goods. So it would start a community. And when Ole Knudsen came here in 1860, he brought in a grocery store, a general merchandise store, and a blacksmith shop.
Here to Old Whitehall?
In Old Whitehall.
Oh, okay.
And he wanted to get in a mill. They figured there would be one put in here in a matter of a year or two, but I don't think that ever happened. I can't find any records that indicate there was a mill. But then his son-in-law came up here in 1862. And Ben Wing. Benjamin Wing. He came in here and he started a store with a gentleman. His last name was George. We're not sure of the first name, but his name was George. And the two of them, young Ben Wing and George, they started this store, and there happened to be 200 to 300 Native Americans still living here. And George figured out right away that if he sold them liquor, he could make a lot of money fast. Well, Ole Knudsen did not think that was a very good idea, and he bought him out and told him, get out of Dodge. He said, we're not going to have you around here. So that's what happened. They bought out this George feller. He went farther west, and Knudsen took over here with his son-in-law, and they were running the store.
I think technically it was illegal back then to sell liquor.
It's highly possible.
Yeah.
But I said, we're just kind of, don't bet the farm on what we say, because, you know, we're going off of different records, and there's conflicting interest all the time when you look at these records. But then they went on and they said, well, we're going to develop a community here with no problem. But the railroad was coming. And the guy that we talked about before one time, Henry McCutcheon. No, Henry. Gosh, I look at his name. Ketchum.
Right.
He owned even Patrick's Park at one time. And he owned most of Whitehall, where the city of Whitehall now stands. And his son-in-law happened to work for the railroad company.
Ah.
And his son-in-law was the guy that set up the buying station, someplace where people could bring their grain so the railroad could move it out. So when they set the station up here in Whitehall, this kind of all one hand washed the other. So they all moved in here, and Old Whitehall itself started to die.
Well, yeah.
There was no business because the train was downtown. Everybody started moving out. There was one business started here. George Follett started a grocery store. But he only ran it for about a year, and then he pulled out of here and he moved up to Coral City. And he ran that store in Coral City to about 1880, and from there he moved west into Minnesota. But I says there was a lot of development here, but it started out good. Everybody had high hopes, but it fell to the wayside, kind of like the little town of Russell. over
Right.
there,
Yeah.
Williamsburg,
Right.
New
Williamsburg.
City.
Yeah.
The same thing happened. I said everybody was well intended, and when you only had oxen or the footmobile, there was a grocery store half a mile away or a little service store. That's where you went. But once you got better roads, you got the railroad, you got horses.
Yeah.
You
Little
could travel
faster.
farther. You went
Yeah.
to the big city to buy your
Yeah.
stuff. So it drived up the little communities along the way. So Old Whitehall fell to the wayside. And I said, Coral City, as much as it had flourished and had a lot of industry in Coral City, it's slowly been depressed. We had the Civil War, which took a lot of the young people away.
Right.
They had the severe winter of 1856 and 57, which really hurt them. And then there was a recession, depression thing in 1857 that also really hurt these small communities. They had a hard time going because every time they got started, one more thing kind of working against them. But I said, the cities grew and they did prosper for a while. But Old Whitehall here did not last long, less than 10 years. They did plot out this cemetery.
Yeah,
that
this
was
is
10.
about all that's left of Old Whitehall, as far as I can see.
And I believe the oldest grave probably in the cemetery that we can find with a marker is 1871.
Okay, yeah.
But when the first settlers were here in 1860, 61, when Knutson came here, so you would think in that 10 years, there's probably someone else in here.
Yeah.
But the records are questionable at this time, there's no one to ask. Nobody can say we're wrong or right. So I says,
Hey, we can say whatever we want then. We can make up some good stories
to some
there.
extent. To some extent.
Well, and I always wonder, people got there in the 1850s and 60s, but then if the cemeteries weren't really functioning till like 1870, where were they burying people?
A lot of them, I think, were buried right on their own land.
Yeah,
their
I'm
own
sure.
farm.
Maybe
I
out
think-
in the field by that tree.
We know ourselves. I said our forefathers, our parents would say if there was a lilac bush in somebody's
Yeah.
yard, 9 to 10, there was probably a premature baby probably born underneath that bush.
Yeah.
Or resting under that bush.
You're
Not
right.
born. But I said, resting under that bush because they weren't going to take him to town. Records weren't required here in Whitehall to be
No.
recorded until 1907.
Right. Yeah.
So I said, all them years, I said, nobody died. Somebody had to pass
I'm
away.
sure there were people that died, so.
We discussed that when we did Whistle Pass.
Yeah.
There was a little church out there where their burials. Priest only came a few times a year.
Yeah.
They didn't save him. He had to be someplace.
Yeah.
So
So anyway, we're here in what's left of Old Whitehall, which is basically the cemetery. And I think from here we're going to head up to Coral City.
I think we'll move on to Coral City because I said when they started pulling out of here and they went to Whitehall, Whitehall did end up with a mill. Like I said, there was no
Yeah.
mill here, but there was a guy named William Golden. He talked to some investors and he said, we're going to make a mill here. He had high hopes and everything. And people got behind him, backed him, but he was a terrible manager.
Oh,
And if the investors themselves went there and operated a mill, it would have failed. So they went in there, they got it going. And Whitehall did end up with 3 mills at one time.
three of
Because
them.
If you had grain, it had to be milled into flour.
Yeah, right.
So I says, well, I think from now on we'll want to drive up the road a little bit, and we're going to go look at some of the valleys and stuff on the way
Yeah.
up here.
So we are on the outskirts of Coral City.
Look at the terrible traffic here already.
Yeah, boy, I'll tell you, we're gonna have to get off on the Cloverleaf here, I think. But we're gonna motor on into Coral City, and we're gonna take a left up
We'll
here.
take a left up here and go up one of the main drives. Highway 53 here used to be Route 11, same one that came through Ettrick. We just did a
This
video.
one, 53
Yes,
was
and this road has been moved like 3 times,
Boy.
left and right here. So
But we're probably going left on the original
yes,
highway.
we'll be going over to the original. They had a big mill in here. I said the first settler up in here was Edwin Cummings, and he settled up here on the right around 1860. And then Jonas Southward came, and he was a second farmer in 1861. Then there was a Coral City flour mill was built here by a guy named Phineas Wright,
Okay.
and his brother Ben to come and joined him a little later in 1863. Now, some plaque books have it listed as Silas, so take my word for it, it could be either one, but they used to call him Uncle Finney, so you would think it would have been Phineas.
Maybe Silas was his middle name. Who knows?
In here, I said, someplace. There was a big dance hall that belonged to Coral City.
Back in here? In this
Right up in here, someplace there has to be a dance hall. We're going to look here, and we're going to look at the people that used to be here. Coral City had carpenters, merchants, hotels, a saloon, shoemaker, a blacksmith. There's a hide tanner, wagon builder. There was the post office was this little gray house right over here.
This was right here.
Yeah, this was a post office at one time.
Okay.
Let's see, they got the school yet, which is still there. Post office was closed in 1878. The school is still standing across the road yet, what's left of it. There was a big dance pavilion here when the mill was built.
Yeah, I wonder where the dance hall was.
It had to be in here someplace,
Yeah.
because even the remnants of the mill are gone. There's no footings left. I was talking to Leroy and Paul Hogg up here, and they said the same thing. They said everything's been carried away and recycled and done.
Right.
But I said when they built the first mill here, it got flooded out in 74. And then they rebuilt it by 76 and it was renamed the Centennial Mill. Then that one got washed out in 1918 and 1934 it was washed out again.
Let's just go up to the bridge because that
Sounds like a plan.
that would have been part of where the big mill pond was.
Yes, everything to our right would have been part of the mill pond.
Which was sizable. If you see a picture of
Oh,
it.
there's pictures of it. Yeah, they'd go ice skating and fishing
Yeah.
here, and
Boating.
you can see there is lowland. This would have made a good holdback for water
Yeah.
here, for the mill to be constructed. And the mill lasted here even after it was discontinued in 1898. It was reused for some storage and mostly for the children to run around in so they get hurt. So finally they had Melvin Dasher came and he dismantled the mill and it was taken away.
Okay.
Now there was people here. I was talking to Leroy Hogg, and Leroy said that he had relation from Coon Valley, which is about 70 miles away.
Yeah.
They came here to get their flour ground because there was such good ground flour in
So
here.
what does that mean that the stones that they used?
It had to be something with there. There was another gentleman that would come from Strum, which is about 16 miles from here,
Yeah.
and he would carry a sack of grain on his back, get it ground, and then carry it back home.
That doesn't sound healthy.
But I said, William Harlow came in 1865, and he built the first store. And the first post office was located in that store. Now, the Coral City store, later on, was moved up to Pigeon Falls. We'll look at that when we get up in Pigeon after a while.
So this is Pigeon Creek, right?
This is Pigeon Creek.
Okay.
And it runs down to Old Whitehall where it merges with the Trempealeau River.
Okay.
Now, the first hotel here in Coral City was owned by Harrison Ingleby.
Now wait a second. This has got to be part here on the left. That has got to be part of the old
The pond.
pond.
Yeah, this is a retention pond.
Where did the mill sit? Right where we are? more
It
or
had to be here on our right, someplace along these banks here, because the drop is here. See, when Coral City, when they built the dam here, when Phineas built the dam, the guys were digging in the hill and they found an odd rock. And they said, this rock looks just like coral. Well, I think what it was sediment from iron. You'll get iron deposits around here. You'll find some like stalagmites and stalactites. And you'll find such as spindles. And it would look like coral. So that's how it got named Coral City when they were looking to build a dam over here. And like I said, been ripped out a few times and replaced. Now, here is a repair shop here. It used to be across the street where Comstead's auto body is now.
Oh, you know, then when you say Coral City now, everybody says, oh yeah, that's the place that's got the car on the pole.
But that used to be Leroy's shop. Leroy worked in there, and then he rebuilt across the road here.
Yeah.
Leroy and Paul built here in 68, I believe, is when they did that.
And boy, that is one place you can get things fixed. They know what to do.
Right across the street, that was Clara's store. The gray building or tannish building there, and straight ahead is the schoolhouse.
Well, there was a wooden school.
Yeah, the first school was built before 1870. We're not positive the year, but it is out this direction, about a mile or so out of Coral City.
And I was told that original schoolhouse was moved down to Schonsberg.
Yeah, and made into a building on his farm.
That it was a garage or a shed. It's probably still
Yeah,
there.
they added on to it.
Yeah.
And this building was built 1916, the schoolhouse over here.
Yeah, and it's a very nice one. It's actually got 2 rooms.
Yeah, and it closed in 1967.
Yeah, it was a really nice school. Got lots of pictures of it, and it's a nice building. So now it's kind of turned into a duplex, I believe.
See, in Coral City here, and more in our time, I guess, Coral City was the home of Foss and Warner. They were a butchering plant.
Sure.
Keenan Ford was just down the road here. Ivor's Woodworking is still here. Klumsky's body shop is still here. Now it's Clara's store we just mentioned here. Well, their trucking was there. Coral City Sales, they did horse apparel and stuff like that.
Auction.
Yeah.
Too, yeah.
Leroy.
Right up here, I got to point out one of the big families, pioneer families here, were the Simonsons, and when they were a big family, and the father, I think he did barbering as well as he cut hair as well as farming.
Mm-hmm.
And right here on the right would be the old Simonson farm, which today is the Northern Foundation's walking horse farm, and this is run by Diane Shapansky, and she ships horses all over the world, like international. And people might remember Diane because she worked for NRCS, and she was responsible for designing a lot of the conservation things in this county. So anyway, right now we're on Sugarroot Road.
Well, she's got extra company because in the 1901 map, 03 map, it shows that there's a burial out over here.
There was a cemetery there.
The cemetery in that farm, so.
We have not figured that out.
We have, no, but when they made the map, maybe like you and I were talking, it's highly possible it's a family burial.
Yeah.
And then when the second edition, I think 1914, when the map was redone, someone copied it over rather than verified the account.
Yeah, and Diane told me that when she purchased that farm, that Donnie Simonson told her that a relative of the Simonsons had been buried out by her driveway where there is lilac bushes.
There you go. And we said that lilacs before.
That might have been the whole basis of the cemetery thing.
And there's Native Americans it could have been also, but being that it wasn't on the 1878 maps, and we see it in the 1901 map, someplace in that Simonson's relation, left-handed uncle on the right side, someplace somebody ended up being there in a pile.
Yeah, we don't know who. And Diane doesn't have any, she doesn't feel compelled to get out there with her front loader and start digging, so we're just going to have to let it be, I guess. All right, this is Sugarroot Road, and I read somewhere how the original spelling of Sugarroot was. It was quite different than what we see now. Well,
you're good at these Norwegian names. I being of Polish descent, I'm not so good at this. But see, this Mathis Sugarroot settled in 1875. His last name was shortened from the Norwegian word.
Yeah, that's a big one, isn't
it? Sky something dingin' and whatever. Anyhow, his last name meant like a shadowed clearing, like in a woods where you cut out some trees to build a cabin.
Isn't that nice?
That's what it meant.
That's a nice thought.
Then the root on the end of the name was meant like clearing.
Yeah.
So that's how it ended up, these names of these people here. Usually these towns and villages were kind of named by the first people who was here. Some were just by the founder or somebody that had been here or whatever the case may be. I think the biggest thing that Coral City is known for is for all the court cases it's had.
Really? I mean,
there
really
were a couple doozies that they had in
there's
here.
a real litigious population.
Well, one court case here they went through, and the people must have been really holding to their guns. They weren't settling for nothing, and they ended up, the final judgment award was 2 cents. so they had to have it. Then I think there was a gentleman named Duke Porter, and he's affiliated with Blair. His parents were from over in the Blair area.
Right.
And when Duke came over here, he was a little bit jack of all trades, I guess. He was a blacksmith, a carpenter, he was a postmaster, justice of the peace, he was a merchant, a hotel keeper, a legal advisor, and maybe the sole dispenser of legal spirits underneath the law in this area here.
We'll just go up here a little bit, Jim, and then we'll turn around and come back.
Anyhow, it says Duke and George Follett, the guy that moved his store from Old Whitehall up to Coral City, they were evidently partners on a few different enterprises, and there was a stack of hay involved. And somehow that stack of hay disappeared. And both claimed ownership to this hay. Well, George Follett said that Duke stole that hay from him, and Porter owned him that money for that hay. And it was a couple dollars, they figured, the value of the hay. And the court sided with Follett. They said, yeah, that was your hay. Well, Duke never agreed with that. Porter says, no. He said, that was my hay, he says, and he's trying to take my hay. So they said, well, we're going to have to put you in jail. He said, well, then I'll sit it out. Well, this is going to cost money to be here. Well, George Follett said, I'll keep him in jail. I'll pay his rent and board. You keep him in jail until he pays me that couple dollars for that hay. It was just $1 or $2 for that hay. Well, days went into weeks, and weeks went into months, and after 7 years, George Follett said, it's costing me just too much money to keep Duke Porter in jail. He said, let him out.
I can't believe they must have let him out during the day.
I don't know. I'm telling you what I read.
In the jail for
That's what we read in the book. So take it or leave it. But I said, some people are pretty well figuring the law, that's the law, and that's the way it's going to be. But Duke wasn't giving up a nickel for nobody.
Well, it sounds like they were both had a problem with being stubborn, doesn't it?
And I said, when you look at here, when the first settlers came up here, they had nothing to work with, but there was a lot of game, a lot of wildlife. And even though times were tough, they shot pigeons here like mad. That's why we have the town up the road over here with Pigeon Falls.
Yeah.
There was pigeons, there was plenty of game. And they had blueberries. They would pick them, and you could get $1.25 a bushel for selling blueberries. But when they would come into season, because the Native Americans had burned this for many, many years, the blueberries were pretty thick. So they'd end up, they couldn't even hardly ship them out here, but we'd bring them into town. We had to take them in because they wanted to keep the local trade. And then they would ship them farther, and blueberries don't keep that long, so you had to keep moving with them blueberries. But people got it in 1878. They got $1.25 a bushel for picking.
That's probably pretty good money.
I think so too. In 1897, they had a tremendous strawberry yield, and the people were selling strawberries. You got 50 cents for 16 quarts.
Wow.
I would have bought some at that price. That seemed like a good bargain to me.
Gee whiz.
But they said there was such a bunker crop of strawberries that they couldn't get rid of them. But you could sell them 16 quarts for 50 cents.
That's pretty good. And you know, something else we need to mention here, Jim, is that this area has a sizable Amish community.
Yes.
And they really started moving into this area in the 1960s. And a lot of them are up here on County S. And they're good people. They shop locally.
Yeah, they come out. Larkin Cooley has got a lot of them. They have tremendous flower shops, I said.
Yeah.
They're hardworking folks, I said. They stay out of the way. They do the best they can, I says, to make ends meet.
Yep.
And you got to admire them because they have the tradition where we can't have anything that's overly modern, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
A little ways up the road here toward Pigeon.
Now, the mill pond, the sizable mill pond would have been off here to the left, correct?
Yes, at one time the water came right up to this road in high water in the floods. So I said it was quite a galling deal here when they lost the pond, but I says, here's Ivor's woodworking on this side here. But I says, you know, every little town had a mill, and that mill was what attracted the businesses to make them grow, because you had to grind that flour. You had to have wheat, you had to have bread.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, that was the whole basic for some people. That's pretty much what they survived on.
Yeah.
Especially over the winter.
And because of the floods, I said, and the climate at the time, I said, these mills would get washed out. And then there was no place. Who knows how far you had to go to the next one. Yeah. And the grindstones are made, what, in France? I think these big grindstones, they were made overseas.
I don't know.
Yeah.
That would be some shipping expense, wouldn't it?
Well, after a while, I know they started running out of the fine stones for the grinding, so they started making the grindstones in sections. You got them in pieces, and they're assembled and ground.
So yeah.
There's a couple interesting coulees coming up here where there are a few schools coming up. Well, when Wes Daggett came here, that was his first name was Wes, he started the first farmer around raising dent corn. Corn that has dents. Otherwise, we had flint corn, Native American, red, white, and blue stuff like Native Americans had, or the old flint. They didn't have no dent corn. He was the first one in Daggett Coulee. He was the first one to start raising dent corn. And also, there were a couple other brothers that moved up in there, and they were Moe, Jonas and Niles Moe.
Okay.
And they did call it Moe Coulee for a while, but finally it was just renamed after Daggett here. Right here, yeah.
Right here.
I believe the lady that owns it now is Lois Neprud.
And behind it is Daggett Coulee. That makes sense, right?
Mm-hmm. But yeah, you would never recognize this as being a schoolhouse at one time.
No, absolutely.
And it was started in 1884, and it ran until 1962.
And it's certainly a beautiful home now. And now, Wes Daggett is interesting in that he has a connection to Fuller Coulee, being that when Mr. Fuller died, his wife remarried Mr. Daggett. So Fuller Coulee and Daggett Coulee are kind of
Well, there wasn't, I suppose, a overly abundant population.
No.
And then, like we said before, I said if you were a parent and you lose your spouse and you have a couple children, you kind of wanted somebody to help with them kids, especially if they were small.
Now this is going to be going up Fitch Coulee.
Well, there was a story, I think about Fitch Coulee. The school in here was in 1891. The first settler back in here was Olaf Hofstede. He and his wife Anne settled here in 1866. And the Finch Coulee School started 1891. I'm not sure, 1864 I believe, and then it closed 1891. They merged with Daggett.
There is a story about Mr. Fitch, correct?
Yeah, I guess you do. You know that story.
Well, I'm not even sure which farm was theirs, but this was in the early 1860s. The Fitch family were real pioneer settlers, and they must have come from somewhere back east, and I think it was either the first or second winter, which was very cold. Mr. Fitch went up the coulee where he kept his oxen to feed them, but he never came back.
I think I heard that story, yeah.
And they found him, and he was frozen. He was frozen to death.
Yeah, they said the snow was so deep he could not traverse the cattle home, so he'd take a bundle of hay with a fork and he'd go out and he'd feed them every day, and they found him collapsed under that bundle of hay, and I think they did disinter him and move him, I think, to the Whitehall Cemetery.
That could be, but it was
I think he's in the Lincoln Cemetery in Whitehall.
But he's kind of the namesake for this coulee. And then he had a son by the name of Healy, and Healy fought in the Civil War. He was a veteran. I'm not sure if he stayed here or not, but I remember reading that he was a veteran of the Civil War.
Well, I think every one of these little coulees that we drive through here have stories, but they're all being lost because the storytellers are gone.
Well, that's what we're doing, aren't we?
We're trying. I said, well, Pigeon Falls lost their biggest storyteller. They said with Reynolds Thompson passing
Yeah,
on.
I know. He was world famous.
He was
Imagine
108,
that.
and a World War II veteran. Now I think that distinction falls over to Leland Chenoweth over in Blair, and he's
Yeah.
106.
As far as I know.
Leland and Bonnie.
So now I think we're going to go up to Fuller Coulee, correct?
Yes, I guess we're going to go up that direction, and there's another story I think in that coulee. I know Fuller's coulee. The coulee had a school that was started in 1892, and it ran till 1961.
And it's still there, but it's a house.
And there also was a sorghum press or a sorghum, some kind of a mill, right just along the creek, there along the road.
In Fuller Coulee.
No, Fuller Coulee.
Oh, okay.
But I says that's long, long gone. But the information said that there was some kind of a sorghum squeezer or something there.
Yeah. Okay, now we are turning at the Town of Pigeon shop, and we are going to go up Fuller Coulee.
And named after Isaac Fuller.
Yeah. And it does have a famous resident, and that is Mary C. Anderson.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
I met that lady one time.
She lives way up back in there in the coulee, but she is a famous resident of this coulee.
I talked to a few people here in Pigeon Falls that even knew her.
Yeah.
Booming town, they said, but yeah, we know Mary.
So now we're going over again. This is Pigeon Creek, right?
No, yes, this is Pigeon Creek.
Yeah.
Warning alert. Cow, calf pairs, and bulls in these pastures.
No, I'm not
Now, there's
there.
a good sign to have up. Unless you can run faster than that bull,
That's right.
you're not going to be fishing in that pasture either.
Now, Fuller Coulee, you said, was named after Isaac Fuller.
Yes, and I think he had an unfortunate demise, if I remember right.
Well, it was unusual, and the story is that he and his wife, and I don't even know what her first name was or anything, or her name from home, we have no idea.
Okay.
But it was raining. It was the afternoon, and they were laying down on the bed taking a nap, and all of a sudden having this rainstorm, this thunderstorm, a bolt of lightning came in through the window, and it struck him as he was sleeping in bed and killed him. Didn't hurt the missus, but it killed him. Well, they buried him, I think, there on the property, and Mrs. Fuller, in due time, remarried Wes Daggett. So years passed, and they decided that they were going to reintour Mr. Fuller, and they were going to take him to Whitehall, I believe.
To the Lincoln Cemetery, I believe.
Right.
Yes.
And when they dug him up, and I don't know if they had a coffin for him or what, they found out that he was petrified. He'd turned to stone.
That is a highly possible story.
Well, and you think he got hit by lightning, so who knows what it did to his...
I and Sandy were out west, and we were there in the town of Deadwood, and there was a guy there holding a pair of eights and a pair of aces.
Oh.
You ever hear of that guy?
Oh, yeah.
And Wild Bill was buried in the cemetery right in town. And after X many years, they moved him out and put him up on a hill. So the
Right.
cemetery got moved up on a hill there above Deadwood. And they said he weighed close to 600 pounds.
What?
They said the chemicals, the
embalming fluid?
no, the chemicals in the groundwater
Oh.
were seeping into the coffin, and they were literally petrifying this guy and turning him to stone.
He turned
And they said they had one job, trying to move this man back up the hill because he weighed so much. So it's highly possible this lightning could have. I know by Dodge we had a person that same thing. He was on the front porch, lightning hit the tree,
Yeah.
it came down the clothesline, hit him in the foot, that's the end of him.
And
I
was
and
sitting on the porch, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I and Sandy know a lady by Arcadia. We can talk to her yet. She's been hit twice.
Oh, no.
Yeah, if there's a storm around, you want to be around Betty.
Boy, I guess not. Oh, dear.
So,
But anyway, that's the claim to fame
for this
Isaac
school.
Fuller is that he got petrified. And I don't even know which farm he was on up here.
No, and I didn't look. I said, David Bishop from Arcadia too, Civil War veteran. Same thing. Lightning killed him, 1865. There were a lot of people, there were a lot of fires, but lightning would cause them. The church here in Pigeon burned from lightning. You know, a lot of homes burnt, but you were monkeying with kerosene and lanterns. I mean, there's stories where a pigeon knocked the lantern off of a rope and then the hay barn caught on fire. And yeah, I said that happened because you were working with that type of material. It was always flammable. But
now, right here on this corner, this is the old Fuller Cooley schoolhouse. Now, you would not recognize that as being a schoolhouse.
Well, there was nothing wasted years ago. It was recycled, reused, and taken down and used again. And I still have boards on my farm too, I said, that turn around like that. The Arcadia Mashers and Proctor Mill. It got recycled into a granary. And Jim Slesher, he's passed away now, but Jim took the granary down because it was starting to fall apart. And he took the lumber from that and he built us a portable bar in the museum in Arcadia, built out of lumber from the mill. It just keeps getting used and used. So,
but that's good.
Yeah. And nothing was wasted. I know you just did a video here the other day with Mary and you were making snow pie. There was nothing wasted.
No. So what do we see down there?
Muscovies.
That's those Polish ducks, right?
It's good meat. But skin them.
Yes.
They pluck and fed. There's geese to go with them. Here, go lay on a piece of machinery when you got them around. I'm not saying any more about that situation, but.
All right. So I think that kind of wraps up our tour of Old Whitehall, Coral City, Daggett, Fitch Cooley, and now Fuller Cooley.
And I said, the next place we'll go, let's take on Pigeon Falls. Yep. Maybe we'll get some help on that one.
And that'll be our part 2. So thank you for riding along with us here. And if anybody has anything they ever want to contribute to our knowledge of this, I always put the phone number for the studio on the end. So just give a call.
If you got to complain, you got to subscribe to complain, right?